He walked through the front gate like a man already forgotten by the world. No uniform pressed sharp. No medals catching the sun. Just a plain jacket, worn boots, and eyes that had seen more than anyone cared to ask about. To the people watching him pass, he was invisible. To some, he was a nuisance. To others, a nobody who did not belong. None of them knew that within the hour, everything they believed about him would collapse. Asterisk, what city are you watching from today? If this story resonated with you, hit subscribe for more stories about extraordinary people. The base was busy that morning. Vehicles rolled in steady lines. Officers moved with purpose. New recruits hurried to prove they mattered. This was a place built on rank, reputation, and recognition. If you had none of those, you were nothing. The man at the gate had none of what they could see. His name was Daniel Hawley. He signed the visitor log without ceremony and followed the directions given by a bored private who barely looked up. Daniel did not correct the way the soldier spoke to him. He did not mention the mistaken protocol. He simply nodded and walked on. Years ago, he would have been saluted by everyone within sight. Years ago, his presence would have silenced rooms. But those years belonged to a life he no longer wore on his sleeve. As Daniel crossed the yard, a group of junior officers stood near the mess hall, laughing loudly. One of them glanced at him and smirked. "Lost, old man?" The officer called out. Daniel stopped and turned calmly. "Just heading where I was told." The officer laughed and shook his head. "You civilians always wander into the wrong places. This is a restricted area." Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I was invited." The officer barely glanced at it. "Anyone can print a paper. Move along before you cause trouble." Daniel folded the paper again and returned it to his pocket. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply turned and continued walking. That quiet obedience irritated them more than defiance would have. Behind their laughter, something heavier followed Daniel with every step. Memory, weight, responsibility. He had spent most of his life carrying others through chaos. Now he carried himself alone, unnoticed, and that was exactly how he wanted it. Inside the administrative building, the air felt colder. A young clerk sat behind the counter, tapping at a keyboard. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Daniel Hawley." She typed, paused, then frowned. Her fingers slowed. She looked at the screen again, then up at him. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She swallowed and checked again. "Please take a seat." Daniel nodded and sat on a bench against the wall. He watched officers pass, all sharp edges and confident strides. None of them looked at him twice. One brushed past his knee without apologizing. Minutes passed. Then more. A colonel emerged from an inner office, speaking briskly into a phone. He stopped mid-sentence when his eyes fell on Daniel. The color drained from his face. He ended the call without explanation and walked over slowly, as if approaching something unreal. "Sir?" The colonel said, his voice suddenly unsteady. Daniel stood. "Good morning." The colonel snapped to attention and saluted. The room froze. The clerk's eyes widened. A passing captain stopped dead. Conversations died in the air. No one understood why a man who looked like a forgotten visitor was being saluted by a senior officer. The colonel lowered his hand, his voice tight with disbelief. "We were not told you were coming in person." "I prefer it that way," Daniel said. The colonel nodded once. "Of course. We will prepare the briefing room immediately." Whispers spread like fire. "Who is that? Why is the colonel saluting him? Did we miss something?" Daniel followed the colonel down the hall, past the same officers who had mocked him outside. Their faces had changed. Smiles were gone. Confidence replaced by confusion and fear. Inside the briefing room, the colonel closed the door. "Double quote, sir. If there is anything you need," he began. Daniel raised a hand gently. "I am not here for ceremony. I am here to observe." The colonel hesitated. "Understood. But the men should know who you are." Daniel's gaze hardened slightly. They will. Soon enough. Daniel Hawley was not a nobody. He was the man who had written half the doctrines they trained under. A strategist whose decisions had saved thousands of lives. A commander who had walked away from rank when the cost became too high. His name existed in classified files and quiet conversations, not on plaques. Outside, the base continued its routine. A training exercise was scheduled. New officers were eager to impress visiting inspectors, unaware that the most important one stood among them unnoticed. During the exercise, mistakes piled up. Orders conflicted. Communication failed. A simulated crisis spiraled out of control. Daniel watched silently at last. The supervising general called a halt. Frustration etched deep into his face. What went wrong? No one answered. Daniel stepped forward. With respect, he said, his voice calm but firm. Your command chain broke at the first sign of pressure. You trained for obedience, not understanding. The general stared at him. And you are? Daniel met his eyes. Someone who has seen this failure cost real lives. Silence pressed down on the group. The general looked to the colonel, who nodded slowly. Sir, this is Daniel Hawley. Recognition hit like a physical blow. The general straightened instantly. The Hawley? Daniel inclined his head. Every officer stood at attention. The ones who had laughed earlier felt the weight of their words crash back onto them. The nobody they had dismissed was the reason they wore those uniforms at all. Daniel looked at them, not with anger, but with something heavier. Disappointment mixed with hope. Rank matters, he said. Experience matters more. And respect should never depend on what someone looks like when they walk through the gate. No one spoke. The exercise resumed under his guidance. Corrections were sharp but fair. Lessons were learned the hard way, without cruelty. Without ego. By the end of the day, the base felt different, quieter, more aware. As the sun lowered, Daniel walked back toward the gate alone. This time, every soldier he passed saluted. He returned none of them. At the gate, the same private stood watch. His posture stiffened as he recognized Daniel. Sir, I am sorry, the private said quickly. Daniel smiled faintly. You did your job. Just remember, every person you meet carries a story you cannot see. He stepped beyond the gate and disappeared down the road. Once again, just a man in a worn jacket. But the lesson he left behind stayed. Somewhere inside that base, arrogance had cracked. Humility had taken its place, because sometimes the most important people are the ones who ask for nothing. And the true measure of respect is how you treat those who seem to have no power at all. What did this story make you feel? Where are you watching from? Subscribe to Soul Relief Stories for more real stories that heal the heart.